Welcome to another edition of Throwing Down Some Heavy Light. My name is Aljamal Binding. I'm the chair of the board of directors of BOR, which is Movement in Omaha for Race Equity. An organization that's been around for over 10 years, and we're one of the only organizations that deal with anti-racism and race equity on this level. And so today we have a special guest with us, and I invited her in to talk about some of the programs they're working on. Now, I'll just give a kind of a brief overview and then introduce her and let us rock and roll, as we would say. I first heard about this program years ago in the community. It's a new program in the community I heard about recently, rather, called Documentaries, where community members can attend public meetings and write about them from their perspectives after an orientation about this national program. This program puts every public meeting on record, which is their quote. There are more than 1,800 documentaries network folks working across various cities in the country. I've heard about this from Cheryl Weston originally, and Cheryl Weston is a longtime community advocate and has a lot of social credibility in terms of dealing with some of the social justice issues in our community. And she also directed me to Abbie Kretz, who is a director and will provide more of an overview of that program and opportunities for community members to focus on being advocates or documentaries on these public meetings, because in Omaha, we have a lot of meetings that go on with it. People don't know what happened that are public meetings. Also, this opportunity will give taxpayers and residents of our city a chance to help hold public officials accountable. So I would like to start off by saying, Abbie, can you share with the viewing audience a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, and thanks, Ajmal, for having me. This is great. Name is Abbie Kretz. I have been in Omaha for about 15 years now. I'm originally from Schuyler, Nebraska. After I graduated college, I was a volunteer in Peru, Nebraska, Peru, the country, where I worked with nuns and really got to harness my Spanish skills. Came back in 2007 and then worked with an organization here in Omaha for about 12 years as a community organizer in South Omaha. We also had some organizers in North Omaha and in rural Nebraska, really focused on workers' rights, leadership, and development, as well as civic engagement, doing quite a few get out the vote campaigns as well. And recently started this position in July and really looking at how we can engage more folks as well. So
Yeah.
That's me. I got a couple dogs, so if you hear anything, that would be them.
I got 2 cats, but I put them out of my room because they're like, I'm not a dog person, much as a cat person, but cats I just deal with them. They're good. Over the years, I've heard Abbie about private meetings by public officials. For example, the Omaha Public School Board years ago used to meet in the lunchroom, and they were having lunch after a committee meeting or whatever. And they would crack the door open a few inches and call it a public meeting. I learned this from a World Herald reporter. I'm still determined if they're still doing that, because sometimes public officials go back in the back room and close sessions when they're not just talking about personnel issues, but they kind of negotiate all the stuff that goes on in our city. I assume that happens with city council as well as county commissioners, but I don't know for sure because I'm not in the room with them. But the question I'm asking you is, this program is important, and why isn't this project so crucial for Omaha, and particularly in Douglas County, and so on? Why is this important from your vantage point?
I think I would say from my opinion, it's important because 2 things. One, we're able to provide more information to the community about what's going on in this public meeting. So before I came on board, we started looking at the different institutions that are out there in the within the county, the city, as well as the school boards here. And we have about 70 different entities that are potentially like public entities that hold public meetings. Some of them, of course, we don't know when they meet because they're advisory boards. So I don't know if they actually meet at all. But a lot of them happen during the day when folks can't go. They are not streamed. The video is not posted. People aren't going to watch a 2-hour meeting. And it's not accessible. And oftentimes these are places where decisions are getting made about our lives, right? So as I mentioned earlier, I worked a lot in get out the vote campaigns for like the last 12 years and even nationally, right? So we always talk about federal elections. There's a larger voter turnout during federal elections, which is fine. But then when we get down to like the meat of things and what impacts our daily lives, it's definitely more at the local level. So that's part of it, right? Like these are things that are impacting us daily. 1, 2, I think this is also kind of an extension upon the right to vote. So we really want people to vote, but then what happens after that? How are we beginning to hold elected officials accountable? And so it's about like making sure that we know what's going on, what they said that they're going to do, they're actually doing it. Yeah, just really looking at more government transparency on a consistent level.
Okay, good. Now, some city and county government functionaries know that low-income people and many people of color can't afford to go downtown and pay for downtown parking. It's $1.75 or something an hour, then whatever. So they're going to be out of some money. Sometimes parking is a challenge on the street when you got all that going on there. Much less attend a meeting as you alluded to during working hours. Is there a better way to accomplish your goals, such as using Facebook or Zoom or something like that, recording versus a documentary, sitting there writing notes and making a report?
So what we're working at doing like right now is to find folks to go and either live tweet or document what's going on. But then from there, looking at different ways that we can disseminate the information. So whether it be like little clips every week about this is like local government in a minute or something. I think that we have to see how we disseminate the information, because again, watching a very large and long meeting isn't really conducive, especially when there's a lot of things that you might not be interested in.
Yeah,
there are some
go ahead.
I was gonna say there are some meetings that are recorded or streamed on YouTube, but not all of them.
Yeah. The other thing, as you were talking, it hit me that some of us suffer from self-diagnosed attention deficit disorder, so we want to sit and listen to mundane, boring conversations that they've already made a decision on. So sometimes the highlights are the things you want to deal with, and then you want to get up and walk out because some of that drivel is not important. But I say that very seriously because we want to get public involved in government and public policy issues and not have decisions made behind the back door. Now, I noted from reading. Go ahead.
Something too, as you're mentioning that, having gone to some of the city council meetings, it's very interesting to see like the decisions themselves don't just get made at the city council meeting. Oftentimes, like with planning, those are recommendations from the planning department, for developments that get made at the planning committee, or there's other things, but these pieces kind of come together. It's not just a one-time decision, like there's a build up to it. And it seems like to me, like oftentimes we're aware of when these decisions are going to get made. But we think they're going to get made at this meeting, but it's already kind of been made, because they've gone through the process.
And that's how come citizens and people in our communities and country become cynical, because they know that sometimes these things are a foregone conclusion. And years ago, Father Kelleher, when I worked at Catholic Charity, said the meetings are just the formalities. Half the time people have just dealt with this stuff. And so, as I come to work over the years, I've come to see that. And no matter how much you make a passionate plea or conversation or bring some new information, some of these folks are already in the pocket in terms of their ideas. The other issue you mentioned was a planning council, and I'm kind of planning, that I'm a little disappointed in because they don't have enough diversity, but I don't think they do enough community outreach. I've been to a number of their meetings, and they come in with their rehashed PowerPoint. And if you're serious about engaging the community, you want them front and center before you impose a program or give money to some organization that's federal money passed through because you like them, or you hobnob with the elites or the whatever. So you got a good point. So we need to bring people in the beginning, and we need to start to have people, because what's that expression? Those who are closest to the problem are closest to the solution. So yeah, good, excellent.
And I think
Go ahead.
You got like a lot of things making me think about a lot of things too. I think the other thing too is through this program, how are we informing people that this is what's being said at the meetings, but also like, hey, this is coming up.
Right.
Because this is like the action piece.
Right.
And oftentimes you're going to know that there's like first vote, second vote, whatever, but like, knowing how the process works, working with folks to like educate them on how it works, it's like, okay, now is the time.
Right. I think, and as you and I are bantering and talking this, it reminds me when I was years ago doing community forums and meetings where we had elected officials or public officials come out, and the community and people didn't know the difference between county government and city government in terms of responsibilities. And oftentimes people get in government, whether it be the human relations department, planning department, whatever, their outreach to grassroots and folks is woe. I mean, it's just difficult. It's not at that level. So you almost have to tell people what's a state issue versus that. And we have not done that well in Nebraska because when people write letters, they oftentimes write to the wrong person. And then sometimes that wrong person doesn't forward because they say it's not my job. But we need to do a better job of outreach, educating them between county government and city government. And in some states, they work very close hand in hand, so they're not duplication. And I know that years ago, one of my colleagues who was on the board of Catholic Charities tried to get a merger of some of that. And boy, people fought back because they didn't want to be unified in some areas, which would have saved taxpayer a lot of money. But that's a whole different conversation.
Yeah.
I was waiting for you. Do you want a response? Because the way
I'm good. I'm good. I'm ready to move on now.
Okay. By the way, the pro is successful. You make me laugh or smile, so that means we're real. Okay, good. Follow up on something, Abbie. I noticed that from reading the information on your website, it says not to engage directly with public comment session while you're on assignment as one of these individuals, documenters. Can that person ask simple questions at the event? Are they just there like a neutral reporter, or can they sometimes raise a point? And I know there's a fine line there, but talk to us a little bit about that from your vantage point.
So, the goal and like the person, the job is to go and act as a reporter because their job is to go and take the information about what's being said and report and like discussed back to the community. And so really just acting as kind of like a connection between what's there and then the community. There's probably an opportunity to ask questions for clarification, but I would say more in terms of the engagement piece, not to speak, especially in those public comment areas. We are recognizing and I'm encouraging documenters, if you want to engage in these meetings, that's totally fine. But we have to really think about what will, if you think that this is a meeting that you'll need to testify at or speak, then maybe you don't take an assignment here. Or if you want to be engaged in certain issues like police or, fire, maybe you don't engage on the city level, but maybe more on the county or the school boards. And so just really looking at that so that we can be very transparent and neutral or objective, I believe, in terms of what we're reporting.
As you said, it's almost like this conversation spurs another idea. Years ago, I had a meeting, the late Christian Bond was a public safety auditor, and she invited the police chief, I think it was Alex Hayes at the time, to a meeting. And, again, her role is to be that role, but it was like maybe 6 or 7 other people in the room. And the whole time she dominated. And I was so angry because, you don't bring people to a meeting and just let them sit there and you come like you're their spokesperson, especially with race and issues related to police issues. So part of my comment is if we're serious about branching and breaking out this process and deconstructing it, we need to let some of the very people who are engaged to have input and do that. And so just because sometimes we're appointing and anointing sages doesn't mean that we have all the substance of our respective groups or community. And we got to really flatten that pyramid out in this community because it's so painful to see some of the stuff that goes on where we really don't bring it back to the grass tops or the grassroots. So,
well, I think that's where, having the community organizing background that I do, I've talked when I was going through training, we always talked about how people give away their consent of power, and one way to do that is through misinformation.
Right.
And so I think the goal right now is okay, let's build up a team of folks who can go and document them. I'd like to hire maybe an organizer later on, and maybe some media people to see how do we then disseminate it to other community groups so they can work with their members or constituents,
right,
to organize around these issues.
Yeah, and as you say that, one of the things we're working on with the more is we're trying to get access to recipients of service, whether it be Douglas County, State of Nebraska Health and Human Services. There are a lot of people in our systems, including the nonprofits, or the Appleseed Voice for Children, where they operate, but they don't really talk to their constituents. Legal aid is a good example. They do what they do, but they don't have a community organizer person to work directly with them. Our decent advisory committee, many of these organizations operate out in the hill or in West Omaha, and yet they serve a high percentage of poor, low income, or working class families. So, sometimes your proximity of your organization, 200th Street in Elkhorn or La Vista is not going to catch it for the people who live east of 72nd. And again, our community is becoming much more integrated. So we're not always in certain pockets, but you at least have access to their names and numbers and whatever. And so we got to figure out ways to bring the voiceless into our voices when we're so-called advocates or whatever. And again, if we're middle income, how do we speak to someone who's a single mom, with 2 or 3 kids living off meager incomes? And the money we waste on systems and program could better help enhance these families directly, because you can change your lifestyles by increasing their income. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yep.
I was gonna raise this other point. Your program pays folks. It's also where you pay
Oh
like
yeah.
$15 an hour. Like, okay, excuse me, can I get a job with you? I can use a little money in my pocket every now and then. How much are we willing to talk about? How much money, and how can I make good on how much my writing skills? So basically, let me translate what I just said, because I know what it is. How much do you pay folks? And then do I have to have a certain amount of writing skills to participate in your ability or your program? Because some of us come through a school system that didn't do us justice in terms of education, and we see that every day with the disparities. And again, with COVID-19, there's some kids who are coming through these systems. And I went to school with a guy in college who couldn't read and write, but yet he got accepted at the University of Nebraska Lincoln. So my question is, how much you pay folks, and how good do my literary writing skills or whatever? I mean, I don't, I'm not like the great writer, but how do you do that? Deal with that.
So we're going to be paying people for the time that they're at the meeting. So $15 an hour for the time they're at the meeting, and in addition to that, another $30 to kind of organize their notes before they submit them. With that, in terms of like their writing skills, etc., we're really, I mean, hopefully somewhat being able to write, right? But I really see this also as like a way for folks to develop skills in their writing as well. And so really doing a lot of mentoring, trainings, the editing, providing comments, feedback for folks too. It's I think as long as people are willing to learn, that's probably the biggest piece more than anything. Because we're also part of a national network, we're also able to connect folks, not just here in Omaha, but with other communities. So if they have, because this program has been around for a while and Omaha is very much the newest one, a lot of the other communities as well provide different trainings on writing. We're able to connect with the different institutes that maybe aren't specifically like the documenters, but where people can go through like free webinars about writing. And so trying to connect folks to those things as well about different skills development too.
Right.
That's one thing. Secondly, I was going to say too, the other thing, so yes, we want folks to document. My thought is, okay, if that's not a skill set you have, what are other skills you have that maybe we can collaborate on? So is it maybe you're a very good speaker? As we continue to develop this, would you maybe be somebody to go and like present information to different groups? Maybe you have some other media experience, so recordings or video editing, as we build it out. So I mean, again, we have to get like the base of it started up with the documentation, but I think there's definitely other skill sets that folks can bring to the table too.
Excellent. And also we can talk, about some other opportunities that could be out there by using the very people you work with to knock you up to another level. Because I think there's enormous possibilities and opportunities and vignettes, as I say, spider webs of things that could transform our wretched community when we got people at the bottom doing what you're talking about.
Well, the other thing too, so we have like two different areas or assignments as we call them. One is the actual documenting of the meetings. The others that like some of the communities that are more established have done are also they call them special assignments. So it's like, as we go through this, what are things that the documenters actually want us to, maybe look into more? So could it maybe be I don't know, surveying some folks about different issues. For example, in Detroit, they just did a Docs on the Bus survey. And so they actually had documenters who went out for 40 hours. They got paid to do this and surveyed folks on the bus about what they thought about the public transportation system, but that was an actual assignment. And it was like talking to people and really just getting feedback from folks. And so I think as we continue to go out, what are things people want to know more about in terms of local government, local county, city government, and ways that maybe we could, research a little bit more, look into, talk to folks as kind of a tool for the broader community too.
As you're alluding to that or talking about it, something hit me that almost every department is worth its weight and call itself public funded. And again, we had a great surplus in Nebraska this year in terms of money. We could hire community workers in government or people who can make their system deconstructed and make it plain, because right now these guys are holed up in their cubicles and offices and they're talking to each other. And I was talking to somebody in one program in Douglas County and asked them about the advisory committee, and they were all their friends. I mean, it was like the same old professionals, same old usual suspects. And this particular person, I'm not going to mention the department right now, but they've probably never been east of 72nd or even North Omaha in their life, but yet a high percentage of people they served in their program or so-called program was really not effective. I mean, they didn't want to produce data. And that's another issue, is that we got to help our people to understand what the data is and what are the outcomes. Because sometimes we confuse outputs from outcomes, and we can keep doing the same old stupid, silly, asinine things in our systems. But if we don't show an improvement in, test scores or whatever you use for measurement, then we create the same dysfunctional, I want to use the word caste system for generations. So yeah.
Yeah. I have to say
go
I'm a data nerd. I mean, I think it's like, how do we produce information to folks and then also work to be like, well, how do we begin to question it, right? And then
Right.
help create those spaces in those public meetings to be like, well, what does this really mean? And it can't just be people, like me to go ask those questions. It has to be folks who are impacted by it. We
Right.
have to see how we get the information out to the communities
You know, I,
specific.
I participated in a juvenile justice workshop years ago, and one of the person who organized it and paid for it was asked later, how do you measure the effectiveness of it? And her comment was, I don't have to measure because I paid for it. And so it's that same kind of arrogance where, again, if you're not asking the people, how was the food? How do you know if it's getting better or whatever? And I use the example when my wife and I went to New York City, and we'd go to the different restaurants or ethnic, racial restaurants, and they have, whether it be Jamaican or African or whatever, every place the food was excellent. And I think part of that is because they got a high percentage of people to come through their system. But the guy even came afterwards, well, how was my food to cook? Literally it was a small restaurant. But I'm like, man, this is dangerous. I think I might have bitten my fingers or bit them off. Or, and then my other line is, I might commit a felony for this food. Can I come back tomorrow? But my point is, we got to do a better job of asking the participants what they think of what we do, and not use that arrogant elitist mentality that I paid for, so therefore it's good. Or you go and get a few of your bobblehead personalities who just tell you how good you are. And it's just unfortunate that happens in our community so often.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you a different kind of a question. Over the past few years, Omaha Public School Board, City Council, and commissions do not hold public or community forums with grass top leaders. And I say that very seriously because I'm old school, and I grew up in this community where back in the day, you would have the superintendent of schools go out to a community meeting by himself, or you would have board members going to community meetings where people are grassroots parents who have kids in the system talking directly to them. They didn't bring their whole entourage of every functionary in the system out there with them. And even elected officials and human relations, you name it, they did community forums because that's how we did it back in the day. And basically, some people believe that these documents, citizen documents, can help offer that transparency and accountability of public official. Is that one of your goals?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's how do we give information to the community? Definitely, like in that way. I don't think that we should be replacing the fact that government officials and public officials should be still going out to talk to the community. But it's how do we hold them accountable? Even earlier, you had mentioned, and I'm still learning how this works, but like the Open Meetings Act. So what does that actually mean? Are meetings actually are they following the Open Meetings Act? So if public meetings are happening behind closed doors, that's not really a public meeting. So I think my point is making sure that the law is followed and letting folks know when it's not. And then really looking at that transparency piece too, in terms of the decisions that are made. Yeah, I mean, and that's kind of the point. Like we're able to, because all of our information and our notes are published online, we're helping to increase the public record, and anyone can go on and access that information. You can search for certain terms, you can search for certain items, you can search for different institutions and entities. But it's all going to be there,
As you say that, it's interesting how you talk, and it brings these other ideas or issues that I've experienced. But back in the day, I'm talking probably over 20 years ago, we had the Department of Education, 25 probably more. We had the Department of Education in Lincoln come to a meeting in North Omaha for the first time and only time. So they had a meeting with people in the community. And it only happened once that I'm aware of. And at the time, I remember there was a shooting where African American was killed by the Omaha police officer, and the commissioner at that time, I think it's Christensen, made a comment to me when we were talking about it on the phone. He said, I'm bringing all these board members to North Omaha. You got to guarantee they're safe. I said, no, man, that issue is not going to impact this meeting. Yeah, got it. But my point is, to this day, I don't think they've ever had a meeting where predominantly the audience was African Americans or low income women, people of color. And particularly, there were some whites in the meeting. But I do remember that meeting. There was an African American woman who made a speech that was so powerful. I wish I could record it, but she talked about her life as a parent and why education system was failing her. So my point is, I wish we can get people to get out of their locations and meet with all Nebraskans or all Omahans or Douglas County residents by getting out of that. I want to call it, the building looks like a casket or something like that, and do this. So yeah, it's very important to get out of those isolated insular. I call them plexiglass offices where they hide behind like they're afraid of bullets or something. And again, downtown ain't nothing going down there but just the usual riffraff stuff that they do of avoiding people. So anyway, let me stop there and stop making this whole comments on it. Stop it. It's not nice. We're trying to get information out and bring people to the circle. Can you explain your experience with other communities? How do you measure their effectiveness? In other words, you're dealing with a national organization, and we as Nebraskans and Omahans or Douglas County residents always say, how are we doing with the rest of the nation or whatever? So talk to me a little bit about what's your experience of the national or other issues in other cities. I saw some other locations on your website about other cities doing this. How do we fit in, or do we fit in at this point?
Can you clarify that just a little bit?
In other
Because
words, you're just starting. How will what
yeah.
we do differ from comparing what's happening in other cities? And are we okay? Are we at the bottom level of doing this kind of stuff that you're talking about? Are we pretty good, okay already? What do you think of our community? You've been a long time resident.
I think we definitely can do a lot better. Maybe this is me, but there is complacency here, right? Because things is like, it's hard to get involved in local government. And if it's not your job, if you're not involved in parties or like an elected official, or that's, or an employee, it can be kind of hard because we have other things going on. And by the time even myself, I get home, I'm like, I don't want to know anything about it. Am I right? Like, I don't want to be, I'm just realistic, right? And so it's important, but it's how do we, I don't like this word either, but like package it to make it, I don't know, more appealing, but make it digestible, right? And I think that's the biggest thing. I think being part of the network, again, we've only been around for about 4 months, so there's still a lot that we're learning. But I mean, even as you talked about Cheryl earlier, like there is a lot of interest, like people do want to know, people care about their community. But there's a lot of things going on, like people have a lot of jobs because we don't make a lot of money.
Right.
And you gotta eat, you gotta put a roof over your head. And so, looking at different ways that we can get this information to folks, and then but also like listening to people about what they want us to cover, what they want us to look at, because it's not just, hey, here's the information, because it's not just like that providing of the food, but like what do you actually want, what do you like, asking people too. So I think being part of the network, my point is like we can definitely learn a lot from them, what they're doing, what they're looking at, and how can we replicate that or see how it applies. And so, I mean, we're working with Detroit and Cleveland for sure, and they definitely have some racial disparities there too, just like Omaha does. So I think there's definitely an opportunity to learn from them.
Yeah, and also being open to the feedback, like you just alluded to. You got to be open to hearing critical thoughts. And I'm always reminded of Malcolm X's transformation, evolution, i.e., change when you get new ideas, and all the pearls of wisdom he left us through the breadcrumbs of history. And yet we got some of the same stupid ignoramus stuff going on where we're not picking up these words of our ancestors or people who have given us how they address the civil rights or social justice movement. Because you see the stupidness that happened with Black Lives Matter, been nothing but a little corrupt organizations, the directors siphon off money where people are really trying to help the cause. But more than anything, Abbie, I think we just got to figure out how that we cycle through different personalities and issues and figure out what's happened nationally, because why should we as a state reject federal money when the going rate is you take federal money for housing, or as Bob Kerry said years ago, if the agricultural industry does very well, it can impact the whole state. So money in versus money out. And so when I send an elected official or vote for them, I want them to kind of, number one, maybe reduce my taxes, and number two, make the quality of life better, but not get in there and run with their pet projects and act like, they don't want to deal with the reality of our history or our country. But again, those are editorial comments. Oh, go ahead.
Nope.
Yeah, I can go places other people can't go. I'm like Star Trek, but we sometimes have to impact the
Wait, this is Star Trek. The
Yeah,
Star
there
Trek.
you go.
Yeah,
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 you're right.
yeah.
Yeah, man, yeah, you're right. The work of the many versus the few, we like that too, that term. Who is it training for your events? As you were alluding to, Abby, and you were talking about this, that there's an orientation process. So I'm asking you specifically, who will be the trainer for this orientation you do? Is it national stuff, local stuff, a hybrid of both? And then how much are funds expended for this program locally from your vantage point? So I'm asking them like a definite amount of money that you're spending here locally for this program, or your projected amount down the road, and then who's doing all this orientation for these folks who come in your door to be part of this system.
So I'm currently training people as they come through. The material that we've developed is part of what's been developed, like kind of using what other people have developed along the road. There's the dog. And so really looking at the orientation, because they've developed some templates that we can use for it, and then kind of modifying them based on the feedback and how things work here. That's kind of how we're looking at. It'd be nice to get more folks up and doing the training, like the documenters themselves, as we continue to grow. I think that's another tool that folks can do within the program. So that's one thing. In terms of the budget, we're looking at the budget next year. One of the goals we have is to spend about 16,000 in documenters, like fees, not fees, but like the amount of money going back to the community. So that's kind of the goal for next year as well. It'd be great to spend more, but we need more people, and we need to raise some more money as well.
Good. Now, if somebody wanted to participate in this program, that's one of the key things of this interview or exchange here. I would call it a dialogue because we both participated. This is I'm the host, you're the guest, but again, I got to get my little 2 cents in. How would they contact you? And are there certain times that they participate? Meaning, do you have orientation every month, every week, a critical mass? So, number one, and we can't put your email address on our website with this recording, but how would they catch up with you or your program? And then number two, is there a cycle? Like, is this once a month you bring people in, or how do you do that?
So 2 things: people can sign up by, like, they can email me, which you'll put up later, to get more information. The other thing is to go to documenters.org. And then there's a little like yellow button to the left that says become a documenter, and folks can just go ahead and sign in that way, and then sign up for the orientation. It's kind of the first step to do that. Currently I'm holding orientations as kind of an as needed basis,
Okay.
basically, which is every 2 weeks.
Okay.
Because people have emailed me and are interested, and I'm like, okay, let's go ahead and do that. Again, because we're so new, it's just like, okay, we got to build this up and see how folks, to get more people interested. Down the road, we'll probably do it monthly, but we're not at that point yet.
Now, Abby, I didn't ask you this question, but it's implied somewhere, but I'm not sure. You said public meetings. Does that also mean courthouse? Because I do years ago, the League of Women Voters used to have court watch. And I know there's people talking about going inside the court because there's a lot of injustice and racial disparities and issues where these judges sit in there when they're hobnobbing with the county attorney or the public pretender. And I say that very seriously, that, you got some things that don't pass the smell test. We don't have cameras in the courtroom in Nebraska. I think some people are pushing for that. But are you talking to court, or is it just public meetings in general outside of the courts?
Currently, it's just public meetings. So the other thing, and I'm going to get to your question, is on the website, which is, again, open to anybody. You don't have to be a documenter. Because we're part of a national network, and I told you we had put together like a list of 70 different entities. We have something called scrapers, which is a tech term.
Wait, hold it. What did you say? Scrapers? You're about the snow on the ground and the ice? What are you talking about, scrapers?
Yeah, scraping.
Okay.
So I'm gonna see. I'm not a tech person, so I'm gonna see how I interpret this, right, or translate this. So basically, these tech folks are able to go on to these different websites that we've put, scrape the information, and we move it over to our website.
Wow.
Documenters.org. And so the thing that I'm noticing too, like, in order for somebody currently to find out when meetings are, they have to go to different entities, right? Supposedly, according to the Public Meetings Act, this information is published. I think most of it is in the daily record, which most people don't get, about when meetings are happening, right? So most people just go online to find out information. But because all these different entities have their own website, you'd have to search on each one to find it. So we're able to put all of that on one location. So that's open to anybody. Like, anyone can go ahead and see what information is out there. Um, so that's the first thing. And now I feel like I forgot your question, but um,
Well, basically, I was just trying to deal with the issue of the court and all these other stuff you're dealing with.
oh,
All this.
yeah, so that's the thing. I think later on as we continue to grow, is there potential for like court watch? So even like in the eviction court, I've talked to some folks about that, even just observing how things happen. A lot of things in the civil court too. I think there's definitely an opportunity for that. We just have to find people who are interested in that.
When you use the word scrapers, and I really appreciate you deconstructing or defining that term. One of the things that I know for a fact in Douglas County, because I worked there for about 3 years, 3 and so many months, they would hide stuff, or they would put stuff in a very secure place, or their website was a joke. I mean, you really don't know what's happening. And even in the Department of Health and Human, or they call it the Department of Helpless and Hopeless Services, there are things that go on that are public. But you're right. You go in the Daily Record. How many people subscribe to the Daily Record? Maybe you should put it in the Spanish-speaking newspaper, the Omaha Star, or whatever. And then secondly, you should maybe send your information to credible messengers who can get information to their informal network, because we have families who are not, they don't subscribe to these publications, but they have oral traditions and they check in with each other. So that's another way you can do it. But again, the most important thing for me is our systems don't do a good job of communicating stuff. And even when they do good stuff, I mean, I talk to people that I go in with a machete and a hatchet, using a metaphor again, right? Do that. And they tell me some of the stuff they're doing. I'm saying, as a taxpayer, how come I don't know that? That's good work. And so, again, I'm the kind of person I can be very critical, but I can also compliment people who do good work, because sometimes there are good worker bees who don't get any praise from their supervisors or bosses. And I worked in situations where my boss just came out and said to me, you got to take care of yourself. I'm not one who goes up and down and toot your horn all the time, but Ernie says that in the same way. You got to sometimes tell the good work you're doing, because you listen to people, or you got great ideas. Last point, there's sometimes great meetings and ideas we hear in the community, and these systems who implement it never get back to the very people who they got the idea from. So therefore, they feel discombobulated or disconnected. And so the more we have this relationship, connection, symbiotic, or I don't know what we call it, but a kind of a ebb and flow, the more you have that social capital relationship building. And we don't do that well in Nebraska, that this county, this city. So again, I use the planning department's example. They go out, they get information, and they hijack and act like it's their information. And some of them are not the sharpest blade of translating and doing it and getting feedback to the constituents they got it from. So I think a lot of agencies, organizations, and perhaps are guilty of that. And I use the word guilty because if somebody, you quote somebody, you give credit to them. But if somebody gives you a great idea and you want them with a program, you should at least throw some bones back at them by showing them some love.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm gonna,
I was going to mention that in terms of like the Open Meetings Act, we had one man, he was going to go to 2 meetings. And when he got there, like we thought they were scheduled, and then he got there and the way that they were canceled was like a little note on the door. It's like, okay. So, I mean, I think we can definitely do like a better job. And I think we got to move the city maybe into a little bit more of, and just public bodies into the 21st century, and be like, hey, post that this is canceled online, and get your meeting posted. I went to a meeting as well that was canceled, and it wasn't posted online. So,
well, one reason I laugh, because some of these things come back to my own history. I was doing consulting work for Nebraska Friends Collaborative Province, they changed their name to Rose by Rosa, still a Rose or whatever. But anyway, as a consultant, I was working out of my house, and they at times would cancel the meeting, and I would run to the office thinking I'm having a meeting, but they never communicated back to me, because they're on site. And I will tell folks, when you work out of your house, you also need to have some network that people inform you if they do a change up in their office, even though you're not in that location with all this Zoom and stuff that we're doing with meetings or electronically or remote. We need to communicate that back to the very constituent. But just putting it in a daily record or putting it in a paper that you cancel it doesn't do much for those of us who rely on emails and calendars that meeting's going on. But yeah, wasted a lot of gas on many occasions where people cancel meetings. They did a very poor job of communicating back to people.
Yeah. Yep.
We're getting down to our last question, and one of the questions we always ask our guests or our participants and folks, and say, Abbie, it's been a pleasure, but do you have any closing comments for our participants and viewing audience?
Well, I hope people are excited about the program. I understand that maybe they themselves aren't able to engage just on other prior commitments, but if they know of others, to get them on board or even just begin to follow some of the work that we're doing. And I think the more that we can just kind of promote it via word of mouth or on social media, that's going to definitely help us grow the program.
Well, I'll tell you, Abby, I really appreciate you being here today because I know, again, this is a new program and we at More are always trying to bring other people up and organizations that are doing the work on behalf of the community. So we appreciate you being here. We hope you've enjoyed this edition of Throwing Down Some Heavy Light. Join us again next time for another edition, and we will hopefully bring other important issues that impact our families and communities to have social justice and change. So as we say, Baroko, and may the force be with you.